again, I'm Christina Azahar from UC Berkeley, working on PhD in ethnomusicology. More about that later. So I just want to first thank everyone who's made this possible, all the Fulbright staff, especially Mason, who's put in so much time making this happen, and also my mentor, supervisor here, Professor Daniel Party at the Pontificia Universidad Católica here in Santiago, who I just couldn't make it today. So I'm so excited to be around so many brilliant life sciences, but since my field may be a little bit different for some folks, and I think sometimes I have a hard time defining it, I want to just give like a brief overview of like what I see my field as doing, and then jump into my presentation. So the way one of my mentors describes ethnomusicology is essentially the study of how people make music meaningful and useful in their lives. So it's not necessarily just a study of performances or music in and of itself. But, what are the communities that are going on or forming around these musical practices? So the field itself is really interdisciplinary, draws heavily from music theory, music analysis, but I see my work drawing from those traditions, but also drawing from and contributing to feminist and queer of color critique, performance studies, critical geography, anthropology, Latin American studies. So really a lot of different types of fields have gone into informing my work in this specific research project. So a little bit of overview of what this is going to be. I want to start in this presentation by just letting us listen to some of the voices of the artists that I will be hopefully working with during my time here. Just kind of letting us engage with what they're saying in this moment. And in the middle, I'll try and present what my theoretical framework, case studies are right now. But again, with the ethnography, things are just constantly changing. So this is a brief clip from a show that I went to back in January, La Cumbre del Rock Chileno. This is Ana Tijoux introducing one of her songs. Is there a way that you can start this at 55? But 1 second. So in this, it goes by kind of quickly, but just an overview of what she's talking through here. So Ana Tijoux is essentially giving her take on music as a political entity, so especially calling out the legacy of a Chilean political song, and I think, and noting that in the context of rising global fascism, as she says, and oppressive political systems, we have to understand the political significance not only of governmental systems at multiple levels, but of every aspect of our lives. So this is Ana Tijoux at La Cumbre del Rock Chileno.
Is that about right?
So 55, if you can.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Sacar la voz en un lenguaje un poco distinto. Estamos en un momento histórico, político, mundial muy complejo. Yo sé que uno aburre con esto, pero es importante decirlo. Porque el fascismo mundial está subiendo como una escala de valores, de que esto no pasa solamente en Chile, sino que en el mundo. Yo creo que mucha gente dice, a mí no me interesa la política. Hermano, la política marca tu casa, tu economía, tu educación, tu ISAPRE, tu jubilación. Y pensar política juntos, si bien a mí no me gustan los políticos, me gusta saber de política. Y la política es la que nos construye a todos nosotros. Y la música es un ser político. La música construye canciones pensantes. Y por lo menos yo me enamoro de la música chilena cuando escucho canciones como Violeta de Víctor, que son canciones políticas. Ese Chile a mí por ende, vamos a cantar aquí esta canción a todos los compas mapuche y pedir al compa Celestino, que está pidiendo liberación, a ver a su familia en Hualmapu, en el sur de nuestro país, y por la liberación de cada comunero mapuche. Que yo sé que uno puede aburrir, pero hay que repetirlo una y otra vez, porque la operación Huracán es tan matemáticamente perfecta por los servicios secretos, no solamente chilenos, sino que argentinos. Y la operación Cóndor actual entre Chile y Argentina es latente y es ahora. Vamos a sacar la voz por cada compa que lucha contra la represa, por la liberación del territorio mapuche. Y entonces vamos a sacar la voz con tremendo cariño.
Hopefully by the end of this year, I'll have a more critical analysis of what's going on here and throughout her larger work. But for now, I just wanted to pull out this clip because for me, I think it exemplifies the ways in which I think it exemplifies first an intersectional identities, solidarity, types of activism that these women that I'm working with are engaging with. And furthermore, I think that it really demonstrates that making space for women's voices empowers not only women themselves, but entire communities. So from that, moving on to my work here with Fulbright. So this is all part of my, my working dissertation project. Again, working title, Noisy Women, Imagined Spaces, Gender, Mobility, and Sound in Chile's Popular Music Scenes. So the central question that I'm getting at here is, how have the shifting relationships of gender, mobility, and sound in contemporary Chilean popular musics transformed spatial politics and spatial imagination during Chile's, specifically during the post-dictatorship period? So I'll break this down a little bit. So I see, in my project, I see mobility as a set of meaningful experiences and ideas about human movement that structure social life as well as spatial politics. So this could include physical movement, social mobility, virtual or imagined movement. And this is where some of my work is drawing from critical geography, specifically Tim Creswell, who defines mobility as one, brute fact, something that you can see and observe in the world, a set of ideas, or something that can be represented through different strategies, and then just an embodied practice, an experience, a way you feel moving through the world. So mobility and gender. Here again, I turn to a feminist geographer, Doreen Massey, who explains why does mobility relate to gender? How does mobility relate? How does gender structure spatial politics? So she says, quote, "From the symbolic meaning of spaces and places, and the clearly gendered messages which they transmit, to straightforward exclusion by violence, spaces and places are not only themselves gendered, but in their being so, they both reflect and affect the ways in which gender is constructed and understood. The limitation of women's mobility, in terms of both identity and space, has been in some cultural contexts a crucial means of subordination." So taking this, since we see that a central tool, perhaps not universal, but a central tool in women's oppression has been the limitation of their various types of mobility, I'm seeking in my work to address how women artists' gender, positionality, identity is influencing their mobility within physical spaces, social networks, and the performance practices of their various scenes and how they're interacting with one another. So finally, sound and gender mobility. So some of the questions that I'm really trying to get at with this multi-part framework is, first, how are women artists claiming space and the right to mobility through sound? What spaces, real or imagined, are women creating for themselves through sound and music? How does sound shape women's sense and understanding of the spaces and places they occupy? And finally, how does tracing a genealogy of women's listening change our understanding of musical histories and identities in Chile and in Latin America more broadly? So a little bit about my methods and case studies. So as anyone who's done ethnography or just worked with people in general, you realize that it's always a work in progress. It's hard to, it's not necessarily a linear type of project. You go in with a set of questions, but then ultimately your work is guided by what's going on in the moment, what people's interests and activities are. So my methods are primarily going to be involving interviews, going to concerts, mostly around Santiago and Valparaiso, but I plan to travel around the country as well, since I'm interested in how women are engaging with different regions of Chile in particular. But more than anything, it's really going to be based on my active participation and involvement with these musical communities, festivals, and more in a couple film projects. So again, my current case studies are based around 4 women artists. Again, I expect this to change. So these are Ana Tishu, Pascuala Ilabaca, Francisca Valenzuela, and Carolina Osaus. So all of these women are, on the one hand, involved with women's advocacy projects, as well as artistic projects that are very specifically reimagining space and place as it's represented in Chilean cultural history. So as this project continues, I expect to probably add some more case studies, maybe adapt the parameters for which I'm including different folks. But this is what I've started out with. So just as an introduction to one of the projects, or one of the case studies that I'm working on, I'm going to turn to Pascuala Irabaca. Some of you might know her. So she's a cantautora, singer-songwriter, very accomplished accordionist from Valparaiso. And I chose her because I see her work, I see her as an example of a travel writer, a musician using song to navigate the world. So that her music is influenced heavily both by her travels around the world, and this in turn influences how she represents Chile in her music and her music videos. Most notably, she was involved with the Chilean TV series Territorios Imaginados, which is documenting culture and history around 6 different cities throughout different regions of Chile, trying to reimagine the ways that those more rural areas often have been depicted. So the song that I'm going to play here is called Lamenta la Canela. So it's based in her hometown of Valparaiso. And I think this provides an example of how she's imagining space and place, moving through it in the space of the city. Includes both, panoramic, panoptic perspectives, as well as very intimate moments of women going about their daily lives. I think the lyrics as well offer a window into her experience and other women's experience of daily life, the quotidian, pain, promise, longing. You'll hear all of that in her song. So if you can start around 22, that's possible. Yeah, that's.
No puedo evitar tanta pena, ventanita de cortina abierta. Me veo en la cocina tan solita. La canela, la canela. Quemó la constancia, quemó la pasión, frío la paciencia, cortó el amor, cortó el amor. Ay,
Wish I could keep playing the full song. I know we're running out of time. So just wrapping up with some of my objectives. Again, further analysis I want to do with this and other work. So although my dissertation really is focusing on mobility and travel, I also hope to put these issues of mobility in tension with ideas of dwelling, of living in a place. So things like what becomes of home in the face of a mobile world. What role does sound and music play in helping women navigating a world which is increasingly precarious, politically, economically, environmentally, and also finding a space within that world. I also hope to provide a deeper understanding of the ways in which gender and sexuality inform the production, distribution, and consumption of music within national and international contexts in Latin America. And finally, in this and future work, I hope that this music scholarship sheds light on the ways diverse women are inhabiting and moving through diverse spaces and making space for the ways they want to live, love, work, and be. So, thank you very much.
I think your project sounds really wonderful. Thank you for sharing it. I'm so interested in this question of the relationship between sound and space and how you can conceptualize that.
Mm-hmm.
But so what movements are you tracing exactly? Or like
Movements as in like social
like so
movements?
when you talk about mobility, so like what are the different like layers that you're tracing, or the different kinds of
Yeah,
mobilities?
great question. So for me, I'm really trying to, this is where I'm sort of trying to bridge like social sciences and humanities type of project. So on the one hand, I really am interested in the sort of like physical spaces, you know, clubs, bars, you know, venues, like places that these artists are able to, or like where are they able to tour, where are they playing within certain cities, how easy it is for them to move around and do that. And then, you know, socially thinking about mobility in terms of the different like, communities they're able to like move within and among in terms of, you know, class difference, ethnic differences, age differences. And then another part of it is the sort of more artistic mobility. In which ways are they like changing the types of scenes and the ways that those have been, ways that musical practices have been, you know, gendered or racialized. What are the sort of like sonic or like artistic worlds that they're imagining through their music. So it's sort of trying to get an intersection of all of these in order to just, it's for me, it's kind of looking at how these women are constructing their own worlds through these practices.
Go for it.
Yes, the question.
Oh, I wanted to ask you, thinking about this question about mobility, are you also thinking about how these artists kind of claim a certain kind of venue or space for themselves? Because I saw at the U in 2015 in a commemoration of the Mir, and there was all these posters of like, you know, the men like Miguel Enriquez, and she's like, where are the women at? You know, so that was her way of kind of.
Definitely, no, I'm so interested, especially with Ana Tijoux, because I think she's one who I think does a wonderful job of, you know, taking, making a name for herself, like going on these like huge international tours, like, you know, claiming a huge space for their, you know, for fans to come and participate, but also has these very, like, it's hard for me to find, very like lower key shows, like in you know, much smaller communities. They're free. There's just, you know, she really wants to have like youth and like folks from like poorer and more like rural areas to be able to like, come and enjoy that music. So that's something that I'll definitely be looking into with her and all the other artists. Thanks.
Yeah, you spoke a lot about women and with your focus on gender, so I was just wondering how like non-binary or masculine identities fit into this.
Yeah, great question. So I'm definitely using women as a more symbolic category, like women with a capital W, not necessarily using that as a way to you know, describe like, you know, I don't think that's the way all of these folks that I'm working with identify. Definitely within a lot of the festival scenes that I'm working with, they have a lot more complex, like non-binary gender identity, and definitely thinking about, I definitely want to think about masculinity relationally to like how, you know, you have to talk about one to talk about the other. So in as much as it's constructed alongside femininity or queerness or you know, a trans identity, I plan to take that on a much more individual basis once I get into the process of interviews. But for now, I think just using women as a larger category and an organizing category. That's my approach.
So you mentioned that one of your guiding questions would be about the genealogy of women's listening.
Yes.
I'm not sure I understand that. Or would you mind saying a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for me at least, like coming from like music studies, there tends to be within like Western music, within all musical practice, there's sort of a canon that's developed, and that canon is mostly men across the board. So like Chilean music is no exception. So thinking especially about the legacy of Chilean political song. Besides Violeta Parra, you know, there's not a lot of women that pop up in those like those legados, these legacies of Chilean music, Chilean political song. So for me, I'm just wondering, like, what are contemporary women, who are they listening to? Like, what women were they listening to? How can I imagine that as a different, you know, alternative to the canon that exists today?
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
Are you working with Francisca Valenzuela and Ruidosa Festival?
I am. I just was emailing them yesterday, actually. They were the one, that festival basically turned me on to this project. I'm really excited. Thank you.
The first clip touched briefly on the relationship between Argentina and Chile in this space, and thinking about Violeta Parra and Mercedes Sosa, and just how Brazil, Argentina, and Chile like moving back into democracy, like different musical comparisons. I'm wondering how much like in between country comparison you've been doing.
I definitely plan to incorporate that into my work. A lot of that's just the constraints of being here on Fulbright. I'm sort of based in Chile, but I think a lot of my archival research really will dig into, or maybe not. I might be traveling a little bit, but I think that some of that'll come through in the archival works, and like you said, Violeta Parra, Mercedes Sosa are older voices, but no less significant. Great. Thank you so much. I don't want to take any more time.
We have a lot of questions, I'm sure, at lunch. So before we continue, Ms. Diana Lopez Rey would like to give us a little announcement.
Hi.